Karma here with your July Astrology cheat codes. If you are here, you recognize that we are astrologically influenced by the planets and stars. And with that understanding of how the energy influences us, we can better navigate life's obstacles. So welcome to the club, and let's take an overall look at what happens in July. All right, so in July, we have several planets going into retrograde. We have Neptune, Saturn going into retrograde in the realm of Aries and will retrograde back to Pisces. We have Mercury going into retrograde in the realm of Leo. We have Venus transitioning into both Cancer and Gemini. We have a Capricorn full moon, and we have a Leo new moon. And additionally, Uranus crosses into Gemini. So there's a lot happening in this month, especially with this retrograde energy, because many of these things are aspecting back to Neptune and Saturn. So there's an emphasis here on lessons, okay? And when Saturn hits retrograde, it can become like a pretty ugly energy. Saturn retrograde energy can sometimes be a little funky, okay? Because Saturn is the planet of karma. Saturn is also the planet of lessons, right? So as it goes into retrograde, it makes you retrospective of the lessons that you need to learn. And sometimes that can be kind of hard. That's a hard energy, okay? That's a hard energy to navigate. So, Saturn is going to be in retrograde for a minute. All right. So this is just the beginning, but it will cross back into Pisces, so it won't be as active in that Aries energy, but nonetheless, still lessons on lessons, okay? Lessons on lessons. All right, so I'm not going to go into deep analysis of each individual transit. I will give you the energy of the transit as it is transitioning into whatever is happening. However, I will create separate videos for all of the things that are happening in July so that we can get a more deep dive look at what it is everyone is supposed to be working on. But this will just be a summary of what's going on in July. So let's talk about the signs. If you are looking at this from the perspective of your rising sign, okay, this will be most accurate for your rising sign. This is because it encompasses your horizon of your life, okay? Your rising sign, your ascendant sign, the horizon of your life. This encompasses everything, okay? If you're looking at this from your sun perspective, your sun sign, this will be in relation to your ego, your attention, your focus, okay? If you are looking at this from your moon sign, this will be in relation to your emotions, your instincts, and your intuition. Okay, so with that, let's jump into the individual signs. Aquarius. Okay, so overall, what is going to be happening in July is there are going to be retrogrades happening in your third house where Neptune and Saturn are sitting, and then in your seventh house where Mercury is sitting. So if we're really talking about it, Pluto is sitting in your first house. Okay, so we're really talking about Pluto. With everything that we talk about, we're talking about Pluto, right? Pluto stays in Aquarius until 2040 something. Okay, so it's going to be there for a minute. However, this talks about a new era happening in your life. This year is the year that Pluto is fully in Aquarius and will not transition back to Capricorn. Okay, so with this retrograde energy, there is heavy emphasis here on some sort of change that's happening within yourself. This is your perspective. This is your focus. This is your attitude. This is the mask that you wear in life. Okay, and these retrogrades with Neptune and Saturn sitting in your third house represents your house of mind. This is your communication. This is your logic. This is your perception. This is also the internet as well. This is short-term travel. And then if we talk about Neptune and Saturn, right, that third house is your mind. Neptune represents your imagination. This represents your subconscious mind. This represents your ways of self-sabotage, your illusions, your delusions, okay? And then Saturn is our teacher. Saturn is the planet that rules over karma. It's the efforts you put in and the results that you get back because of it. That is where your goals and your ambitions lie. So both of those planets are going to be going into retrograde in your third house of mind, okay? So there's an emphasis here on a change in perspective as it relates to how you process information, whether that is how you communicate, your perception, or your focus. Okay, and then we have Mercury in the seventh house. The seventh house represents your long-term bonds. It represents your deep connections. This is where marriage is, those long-term partnerships, business partnerships that span the test of time. Okay, Mercury is going to be going into retrograde in that seventh house, right? So with retrograde, I like to call that the period of restructure, repair, reflection. Okay, and it's something that turns energy inwards, and it has us reflect on our actions from the past. That's why they say retrograde brings the past. It does, right? And that's because we're meant to look at things from a different perspective, okay, so that we can restructure, we can repair the habits that we have going forward to make life easier for us, okay? So there's heavy emphasis on that third house, your mind, and your seventh house, your partnerships, and your deep bonds, okay? Additionally, we have Uranus entering into the fifth house, and we also have Venus entering into the fifth house of creativity. So Venus in the fifth house, that's like that's your house of dating, okay? So there's emphasis here on your first, third, seventh, and fifth house, okay? Venus entering into that fifth house, this is like how you date, right? How you entertain yourself, right? This is casual sex. This is your partnerships. This is also children, right? This is your creativity. This is also entrepreneurship. So for some people, this is business, how you show up to business. For others, this is how you show up to your relationships, okay? And overall, your attitude and perspective as it relates to that, and a change in logic within that energy in your life, okay? So let's jump into the dates, Aquarius. On July 4th, Venus enters Gemini, and that is going to be in your fifth house, okay? So Venus, which rules over love, beauty, abundance, partnerships, harmony, peace, is entering into your house of entertainment, okay? So Venus, heavy relationship energy in a house of relationships. Okay, in a house of starting relationships, in a house of self-expression, fun and games, okay? So there's an emphasis here on you being flexible in what it is that you create, you being flexible in the connections or the businesses, the opportunities that you choose to encounter, right? You being flexible within your mind. And within that energy, Venus will be sextile to the third house, okay? And the third house is where Saturn and Neptune sits. So again, Saturn is the ruler of karma. It's the effort you put in and the results you get out, right? And Neptune is the ruler of your imagination and your subconscious. So it is like how your mind or your internal dialogue plays a part in how it is that you maneuver through life, okay? So that's where self-destruction lies. That is where substance abuse lies in Neptune. That is where illusions, delusions, confusion lies, your desires and your fantasies. That's where that lies, okay? So there's sextile energy. So there is a direct link between your third and your fifth house, right? Fire and air sextile energy creates opportunities for you to move forward in life. So there is some sort of change in perspective. There's some sort of action as it relates, I guess, how do I say this? There is energy around your mind and how that plays a part in the actions that you take, whether you become impulsive, whether you become impatient, whether you try to move quick and fast, whether you try to show up with a lot of ego and a lot of pride, right? This is you taking a step back and processing through that energy. on the same day, right, in that third house, Neptune goes into retrograde. So there's heavy emphasis on you processing that energy. Retrograde is reflection, restructure, repair, right? It gives us the opportunity to look at things from the past or look at our actions that we have already taken and how that has played a part in our lives, in the forward movement of energy, and how we can pivot and maneuver to change that for a better solution for ourselves, right? So there's heavy emphasis. I'm getting, there are people here, their dating lives, how you approach your dating life, how you show up to your dating life, how you express yourself within your dating life or within casual sex or to children or, starting entrepreneurship, you needing to change that perspective. Neptune in retrograde, as I said before, that is your imagination. That is also where illusion sits. That is where your self-destructing habits sit as well. So there's a need for you to pay attention to, especially with sextile energy. Sextile doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to have this great opportunity presented to me. When I say opportunity, it doesn't mean good or bad. Okay. So I'm going to give you an example, and we're going to continue this example all the way through the video, right? Okay. So there's somebody here. We're 1, 3, 5, 7. Okay. There's somebody here who dates. Okay. And they feel as though, when they start a connection, so the other party needs to pour everything into them, right? I want things to move quick. I want for you to talk to me all the time. I want for you to text me every day. I want for you to, I want for you to do all the things off bat, right? And that's fine if that's what you want, right? Like, I'm not saying anything's wrong with that. However, if that is not what your life calls for, right? If that's not where the trajectory of your life, there are going to be energies that come in that kind of change your perspective on that, right? So in that same example, right, you find somebody that you want to date, and you end up liking this person. That's the 5th house, right? Short-term connection. You find somebody that you want to date, and you like this person so much. Oh my God, you like this person so much. However, they don't love bomb you in the way that you want to be love bombed on. They take their time. This is what I mean by opportunity. They are very expressive of the fact that they take their time. So the energy seems very opposite to what it is that you want, but you really, really, really like this person. What are you going to do? This is an opportunity for you to figure that out. What are you going to do? You really like them. This is your 7th house. This is something that could turn long-term for you. What are you going to do? Are you just going to drop them off to the side because they just choose to move slow in the beginning and you don't like that? Right? So that's what I mean by opportunities. It doesn't mean, oh yeah, you get a person that's gonna love bomb you and then y'all go off into the sunset and get married. It's going to be a presentation of energy that kind of opposes how it is that you feel. So like, what you gonna do? Or it could be something from the past, right? Same energy. Somebody comes back from your past, and we're going to use that same energy, right? You stop talking to somebody in the past because they did not love bomb you, right? And you're at this point where you're starting to question whether or not love bombing is what it is that you want. So now the person comes back, because we in retrograde, comes back like, what happened? I don't know why we stopped talking. And you're like, because you didn't love bomb me. And the person is like, oh, well, I will eventually, but I feel like if I'm getting to know somebody, like I want for there to be equal back and forth, or I want and you start to really dig into your perspective of how it is you first start dating someone and try to take that into a long-term connection. That is the energy between that 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th house. Okay. All right, so Neptune goes into retrograde in that 3rd house, and this is your self-destructive ways or your imagination and how that plays a part in your perspective and how it is that you act, because it's Aries energy. On July 7th, Uranus enters into Gemini, so your Uranus will join Venus in that 5th house of self-expression, okay, that 5th house of entertainment, and Uranus is about sudden changes. Uranus is about out with the old, in with the new. deconstructing old structures in your life and building something new, right? With this Uranus energy, right, entering into Gemini, right, there's a change in your perspective. So again, heavy emphasis, if we go back to that analogy of somebody who likes to be love bombed, and there was somebody from the past that you really liked, but you just ghosted them because they was not love bombing you, and all of a sudden that person pops back up and they like, man, what happened? And now all of a sudden you have an opportunity here for sudden change. Now you have the opportunity to express yourself with that Gemini, express your perspective, and they will have an opportunity to express their perspective as it relates to short-term dating, right? That is that Uranus in Gemini energy, okay? Now, again, that third house and that fifth house is sextile. So again, opportunities to change your mind. All right, up next, July 10th, we have a full moon in Capricorn, and that happens in your 12th house. And your 12th house is ruled by Pisces, which is ruled by Neptune. So back in January, you could have dated this person back in January. At the end of January, y'all ended. You was like, I'm done. You not love bombing me. I don't want to talk to you no more. Y'all don't talk for 6 whole months. On July 10th or around July 10th, you see this person out somewhere. You see him at a bar, you see him at a grocery store, you see him at Target, you see him somewhere. And now let the conversations begin. Right? So this Capricorn, when I think of the moon cycles, because there's another moon that happens this month, right? When I think of the moon cycles, when we have a new moon, that means the sun is sitting directly by the moon. There's that little sliver of light because the sun is next to the moon and it only illuminates that sliver. Then we have the full moon when the sun is sitting across from the moon and it is illuminating the whole moon. The new moon, if you think about nighttime, you can't see too much at night in a new moon because it's only that sliver of light. When you think about a full moon at nighttime, you see a whole lot, right? Because the sun is across from the moon. So you see everything, right? You see a lot. The moon reflects that light right back down, and you see a whole lot more on a full moon than you would on a new moon, right? So this talks about like you not really seeing the full picture back in January, using the analogy of you know, ghosting somebody because they wasn't love bombing you. And then they come back, and y'all have this conversation, and now you get clarity as to how they think and how they move and how they maneuver because you didn't have that conversation before. And now your perspective might change a little bit. This is an opportunity, right? This is what I mean by opportunities, okay? And then on July 13th, we have Saturn going into retrograde. Okay, so Saturn is going to go into retrograde in that third house. So now both Neptune and Saturn are in retrograde in the third house of your mind. Your actions around your perception or your perspective or your focus, right? How you communicate, right? And that retrograde energy is sextile to that first house where Pluto sits, right? Your overall change, right? This is yourself, your attitude, your behaviors, the mask you put on, right? Your focus as well. So there's an emphasis here on like a change this is all like a very intrinsic change for you, Aquarius, right? This is internal. This is that bottom part of that birth chart, right? This is an internal change to how it is that you view, how it is your ego or your pride is triggered as it relates to your entertainment or how you date or how you create long-term bonds, okay? Then as we get to the later part of July, we have July 18th where Mercury goes into retrograde in the 7th house. So that's your deep bond house. That is your long-term commitment house. That is where your long-term relationships are, right? So Mercury goes into retrograde on the 18th, and it creates that sextile back to that 5th house. Again, we have the 1st house sextile to the 3rd house, sextile to the 5th house, sextile to the 7th house, okay? So there's an emphasis here, right, with Mercury being sextile to Venus. There's a change in, you know, Venus represents love, beauty, abundance, attraction, peace and harmony, right? And Mercury represents your mind. It rules over the 3rd house. So there's an emphasis here on like, again, a change in perspective in how you go about maintaining your long-term relationships. And this is directly by way of how you go about starting your short-term relationships or how it is that you express yourself, okay? So there's an emphasis here on some sort of change, you finding peace, you finding harmony in your mind, how you communicate, your perception, your focus on your self-expression and your long-term bonds. This for you could even be a business, right? Both the 5th and the 7th house represents business, relationships, and entrepreneurships, right? So it doesn't necessarily only have to be a relationship. This could also be children. The 7th house represents marriage. The 5th house represents children, right? So there's an emphasis here on a change in your logic or perception. Okay, then again, more 7th house activity on July 22nd. The sun enters to Leo. Okay, so there's heavy emphasis. The sun now is shining a light on that 7th house. This is your long-term partnerships. And it becomes sextile to Uranus in your 5th house. So that change, right? The sun entering into those first degrees within the first couple days of Leo season, right? It is going to create a sextile to Uranus. And there is some sort of change there, again, that further develops your how it is that you process through your mind, your logic, your communication, right? Your pride and your ego, right? Your self-expression, and your entertainment, and then also your long-term bonds. I feel like I just got bit by something. Also your long-term bonds, okay? So with the sun entering into Leo, right? The sun is your focus. The sun is your pride, your ego, okay? So there's an emphasis here, right? Change in perspective. I don't know how many times I need to say it, y'all. All right. And then on July 24th, in the same house, okay, we have a new moon in Leo. So this is where that new moon analogy comes to play. The moon and the sun are both in Leo, a few degrees away from one another, okay? So with this new moon, that's where the sun sits next to the moon, and it has that slither of light. You can't really see too much at night, right? So there's something here that pops, right? You won't see the full picture until later. You won't see the full picture until 2026, the beginning of 2026, when we have the Leo full moon. But there is something here, there's a cycle here that's starting. And again, all of this is to incorporate changes that relate to that first house, Pluto being in an Aquarius, in your first house Aquarius, okay? So with this new moon happening in the 7th house, this is the bond. So we go back to the analogy that I said before. You like somebody back in January, the Capricorn new moon, you ghosted them because they were not love bombing you. Then all of a sudden in July, we have that Capricorn full moon. You see them out somewhere and you guys have the opportunity to have a conversation around how you guys both approach dating in the short term, right? And now you in your mind are like, well, dang, I feel bad for ghosting you because I didn't know that, right? Or I had no idea. Let's try this again. You really like this person really liked you. You might be setting yourself up for a long-term connection, a deep bond. You might have found, you might have just run back into your husband or your wife, right? And now you guys have had the conversation. And, maybe a part of that conversation is next time, if you're feeling a way about something, just let me know. Just tell me, communicate with me. 3rd house, your mind, your perspective, your communication. Just communicate that with me so that we can have a conversation with it. And then you guys begin on you continue on your journey, right? We have this Leo new moon. And over the next 6 months, y'all start dating. Y'all fall fast in love. Right? Who knows what happens in the Leo full moon. We ain't even gonna go into the Leo full moon, but this is how things play a part in our life, okay? So with that Leo new moon in the 7th house, now that energy, we have Mercury that has retrograded back closer to that moon. We have the sun, which has, started progressing through Leo, right? So we have Mercury here in retrograde, we have the moon in the middle, and then we have the sun right next to it. So there's an emphasis here on your emotions, because the moon represents your instincts and your emotions. There's an emphasis here on retrograde, restructuring, repair, reflection, something coming back from the past, and you being emotionally triggered, and it's shining light on you being emotionally triggered right now, or you being emotionally triggered back in the past and how you've reacted then. It's shining a light on that behavior as it relates to your partnerships or your long-term bonds. Okay? And then last but not least, we have Venus entering Cancer. Okay, so Venus enters Cancer on the 31st. Now, all of the aspects that we've talked about and the transits that we've talked about in this month have all been sextile energy, trine energy. Okay, so that's opportunities, that's easy flow of energy. With Venus transitioning into Cancer, okay, Venus is hitting those first degrees of Cancer, and Venus moves relatively quickly as well. Venus typically stays in a sign between 3 to 5 weeks, okay? So this is not something that's going to last a long time like Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, or Pluto. This is something that is going to briefly touch down. This square energy is going to briefly highlight something that you need to work on, and Venus is going to move on her way. Okay, so Venus is entering into the 6th house, right? So that is your house of routines, that is your habits, that is your systems that you have in place to make your life go smoothly on a day-to-day basis. Okay, that's your house of Cancer. So this talks about your habits. And it goes back to that 3rd house of your mind and your perspective, right? So that square energy, it's fire and it's water. They don't mesh. It's oil and water. Think of it like that. They don't mesh. Water puts fire out, right? So that is why we have the square energy. So there's an emphasis here, right, on a struggle within your daily routines, and the square energy goes directly back to your perception or your mind or your communication. So let's go back to the same analogy that I have been talking about this whole video. You ghosted somebody, they came back with the Capricorn full moon, the Leo new moon starts a new cycle for you guys start talking again, but this person still, they're acting how they act and you understand how they act, but you struggle, right? Because you are very used to being love bombed, and this person is not doing that, right? And they may not feel like they have even tried to make ends meet, like meet in the middle, where it's just kind of like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. You really not gonna love bomb me? Like, we came back and we talked about it, I know, but I want to be love bomb. I want you to do more for me because this is what I'm used to. It's what everybody does for me whenever I date. Like, I don't know what your problem is. This is that energy, right? Square energy, oil and water. It doesn't really mesh. So there's an emphasis here as Venus enters into Cancer, and she, progresses through the first few days of those first few degrees of Cancer and hits that square energy to Neptune and Saturn, which are both in retrograde, right? And again, retrograde, restructure, repair, reflection, retrograde on your behaviors within that 3rd house, your mind, your perception, your communication, and how your imagination plays a part in that, right? You might feel triggers. You're going to feel triggered about some sort of routine or some sort of habit, right? So overall, Aquarius, for you, there is an intrinsic change happening in July. This is past July, just overall intrinsic change happening on your perspective, but July pulls on energy that relates to your mind, your communication, your logic. It pulls on energy related to your ego and your pride and your attitude, your focus. It pulls on energy around your self-expression, your creativity, your entertainment. It pulls on energy around how you create long-term bonds or connections with people or businesses, right? So there's an emphasis here for you to kind of pay attention to the themes that come back into your life, Aquarius, because this is guidance to help us fall into a better rhythm of behavior that helps us get to our highest and greatest good faster. Okay? I hope this reaches you well, Aquarius.